Right, thank you everyone for joining us for this session. So we are joined by Nick Gonios. He's going to be discussing the Circulist operating model. So this is a 50-minute workshop. So I'll be helping with any Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat and we'll come to them later. So now I'll pass over to Nick to introduce himself and run the session. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to participate. So I didn't participate at the whole event, but I'm here today on a Sunday here in Sydney. So I'm based in Sydney, Australia, and I wanted the first thing for you all to do that are participating is to open your mind, think long-term, and think a little bit differently. With that, I'd like to sort of introduce you, but everyone that's attending to the Circulist event that I'm actually, or sort of session that I'm participating in, and hopefully you will learn and get something new out of what I'm presenting today and covering. So first and foremost, Circulist is a young organization, mission-driven organization that has sort of started about 9 months ago, and we are expanding internationally already through the US and having conversations with the European market as well. And let's get straight into it. So ultimately, what we're going to try and cover is all these different bullet points, and I'll try and be as quick as I can so we can get some Q&A conversations going as well at the end. Our current economy, society, and the built world, the declining industrial paradigm, and what next. You will hear us talk about, or me specifically, circular economy, and there are 2 versions in our view, and we'll go through those, not just one. The new battleground, where the scale-ups versus transformers are coming through with examples of what are and aren't doing well. And the big question is, who will win? The circulists, in our view, have arrived, and they're new breed of business leaders who are on a mission to solve the climate consumption crisis. We're going to present through, as a workshop, our Circulist Readiness Assessment sort of capability that we're building out, which is in sort of beta mode, so to speak, and we're looking for like collaboration partners, and Q&A at the end. So fact number 1, let's start with some facts. By 2050, humanity will need 3 times the Earth's ecological resources to continue to consume as much as we do right now. It's currently 1.6 times. So already we are actually using more than we can actually produce from a resources input point of view. And this is from the Footprint Network as a source, a great organization that focuses on the ecological footprint of our Earth overall. That's first fact. The second fact is the reality is that we have most of, when we look at climate crisis and the analysis that's been done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation a few years ago, if we actually solved for the first 50% of solving for this climate crisis is driven fundamentally about just executing on existing technologies to basically shift us as quickly as we can to a completely renewable driven electric grid. Now, amazingly, all the effort that needs to go into doing that only will cut us to 50% of solving climate crisis issue. The other silent, close to 45% to be exact, is actually dealing with humans' consumption behaviors and the way that we actually produce our products that we use on an everyday basis. So this is a second enormous fact. We believe that the 50% of energy grid electrification is only one part which can actually be solved. It's all about execution now. The other close to 45% is actually about the harder part, the harder 50% that we at Circulist are focusing on. And fact number 3, with shifting to a subscription-based business model has proven to be 6 times more valuable for 10 companies than the traditional models. And I've experienced this firsthand. I've spent the last 30 years in the technology sector, and prior to that, I was a young teenager wanting to do industrial design or architecture. And for me, I fell into the wrong trap when I look back, but it's been an amazing experience to be in the amazing tech sector that's actually flourished in the last 30 years in a short-term horizon basis. But the point is, as we've shifted towards a subscription model economy for the technology sector, it has also created utmost more value in terms of market sector because of its predictability and its value. So on that note, our mission at Circulist is to reimagine products for good. We are building a tomorrow where products are made to be used rather than thrown away. Fundamentally driven by this. It's not going to be short term. It's going to take 2 or 3 generations. So we need to be very mindful around the journey that needs to happen and the difficulties that need to be solved for in executing in this model. But we're on the pathway to actually making it happen. And that's exclusively what we're focusing on. The wicked problem. The wicked problem is fundamental. We are running out of resources, yet we continue to create more waste. How do we solve for it? It's a massive fundamental problem. And modern industry is built on the fundamentals of consumption rather than usage. We seem to surround ourselves with centralized operating models that ultimately create waste. And this needs to change. All people want, all they want to do is actually use reliable products. It's as simple as that. If you look at everyday appliances and products that we use across many different sectors, in scientific fields as well, our laboratory devices and so many others, they should not be driven on acquisition and consumption at their core and ultimately creating e-waste. And we fundamentally believe we are solving for this specific problem. We are focused on this, fundamentally e-waste. So let's take a look at sort of 2 or 3 different perspectives on this. Long-term horizon thinking. A lot of you know this, but just sharing it again. Whoop, went too fast. We've been neglecting, probably from the early days, probably even go back to ancient times, even go back to our Indigenous First Nations community here, valued land, valued everything in terms of regeneration. And so agriculture, as we saw from the first revolution, was an ability to sort of industrialize it, sort of make it a bit more operationalized and driven by sort of efficiencies of land and human intervention and animals involved in the whole process, like we see in this image. We seem to have gravitated and worked around water streams, farms, horses, villages, towns, and guilds. Then the next big shift occurred with our industrial paradigm. And that was fundamentally driven by process flow innovation, efficiencies at its core in the production process, man and machine being the big manufacturing plants and machine as sort of part of the system as simple, workers, so to speak, have actually been involved in the massive uprise of waste that we have in the last probably close to 80 to 100 years. And together with that, our whole approach to living, working and playing through the sprawl of large cities and urbanization has created a very difficult system to actually continue to be bound by. So because of that, we're now entering the 3rd revolution, and it's a sustainable revolution. And we call it sort of the area that actually was going to try and eliminate our waste and recycling it and so forth out of the equation by turning it into a part of the operating system. So we are entering this age. It's going to be the next big war that we're going to have in order for us humans around the world to survive. And we ultimately are driven as an organization to try and solve for this 3rd wave, this 3rd revolution. Another perspective on our sort of global economically driven economy, global economy driven around our sort of core consumption habits, but also the fact that we need to look at productivities. And if we look at the 2 core measures that we measure progress in the world, post-war, post-war GDP as a metric and productivity was sort of created. And it worked well for the first 50 years in inverted commas, probably shaping the world that we live in right now. But the reality is technology adoption, technology evolution and revolution in terms of driving software as a core element to enabling new changes to come through have actually enabled roles and specific roles across the world, across organizations and government and different sectors to actually have to be rethought and we need to rethink around how organizations actually operate and where is the value to be lied. There are some important elements here to talk about, which is that most middle management roles, or most roles in essence, actually, you take Clay Christensen's job to be done framework, for every 100 tasks in a job, most likely 50% of those, or 50 tasks, will be eliminated thanks to technology adoption and technology revolution. That has happened with the simple software sector, where we've gone from a handful of large-scale software companies to actually shifting towards a software as a service model under a centralized approach. This has brought about us some, what we call, by David Graeber, who's in 2018, actually published the book, Bullshit Jobs. If you've ever seen it and read it, it's an amazing book. And it's pretty much in your face reality of what's happening around organizational design and culture. He's an anthropologist and organizational culture anthropologist. Strongly recommend to read the book. And it articulates the fact that most jobs are being reframed towards, or the other perspective is most jobs are actually being lost because of the no way of them being connected to the evolution of that we're entering right now. And so we focus on this and think, how can we reframe this? Now, the other driver here as well is talking about demand innovation, or demand. Consumerism comes back to consumption. And when you look at the overarching problem, madmen and brand people around the world, like Kevin Roberts from Saatchi & Saatchi, and our amazing Netflix series called Mad Men that came about many moons ago, has done an amazing job in brainwashing humanity in that sense, depends which way you look at it, to continue buying more and more from brands and companies that you love. But ultimately, what is happening as our external outcome is waste, fundamental waste, and growing waste in the system, which correlates back to our core mission. And what we're trying to do is reimagine products for good. And with that in mind, we need to bring value and value humanity at all levels, and start to shift away from a centralized operating model as economies around the world towards a decentralized, local by local value system. And this is one of the things that we're very driven by. So the core problem for us is that industrialists, who are fundamentally our manufacturers out there and refiners and so forth, we strongly believe that they recognize that they are selling and producing products polluting the world, but for a financial short-term profit only. And they all have a very hard time to actually comprehend how to shift into a new paradigm. And we need to help them and lead them along the journey. For those that want to come along, is great. We're shifting to a much more circularist world. For those that don't, they'll shut shop and wither away or go bankrupt, so to speak. And for the circularists that come to life and start to drive this capability and approach into market, we see them flourishing around the world. Now, here's a really, really simple example of the linear iPhone journey example right now, and how Apple does some amazing jobs. If we look right in the middle of this slide, we've got the Apple iPhone, beautiful in design, and I won't be sharing any more, any positive reviews on these sort of products and experiences. But the reality is this is the process they take. They design in Cupertino at Apple HQ. They assemble, or then an assembler being Foxconn assembles these devices, then gets them shipped and warehoused globally, right? Sells them at stores or online globally through the most successful retail experience based on square foot to revenue model internationally. We basically pick up an iPhone, and then once we're done with it, we send them back. Or I'm doing this today with my son, actually, with his iPhone, which is having some issues. I'm taking it back. Unfortunately, without right to repair, we actually have to give it away, give it back to them, and they're giving us a particular dollar value. It goes back into their system. They have 2 Apple Daisy disassembly robots that they're iterating along the way, which disassemble all phones that come back and create these raw iPhone materials. Then what? This is the big question. Where are they driving resource efficiency or resource effectiveness through recycling and remaking and taking their products and materials back into the system? Great sort of facade, but fundamentally their operating model is actually not allowing us to shift to this new approach around the circularist operating system. And so from our perspective, all we need to do is shift the mindset away from short-term profit making towards materials usage and value, which we're calling the materials economy. Just one moment. It's starting to rain here a lot in Sydney. Okay. So what are we saying? We're shifting away from the old mindset. Changes going on is at this sort of inflection point, and we want to sort of kick it off to become more mainstream over time. And this will take decades, not years. In saying that, we strongly believe government's there to shape, but business is there to lead, and leading the catalyst for positive change, both on demand side and supply side and operating system side. This is fundamental. If we look at this sort of photo that we have here right now, this image, it's actually the two rocket boosters that came back, the SpaceX rocket booster came back together and landed together for the first time in history. And this is a very important moment in time, because it actually starts to enable materials reuse to actually come to life in the space sector. And this was a matter of like close to 24 months or 30 months ago. And look at how the space sector and space economy is flourishing because of it, right? And it's only at the beginning of that journey right now. But this is a very important time. If it wasn't for Elon Musk and SpaceX who committed what he did, no, we would have been stuck in ground zero still. And it's actually an important moment to drive when it comes to circularist mindset. With that in mind, for the last 30 years, I'm really proud to have been part of the journey to date. This is my 30th year in the technology sector. And I've actually seen these organizations adopt from an old operating model to a fundamentally new style operating model that eliminates waste and issues around sort of right and extended product use. I mean, I'm sure many of you relate to the fact when we're back in the day, Windows 95 came about. I don't know how old many of you are, but I do remember going down to the Harvey Norman store and picking up a Windows 95 box with a bunch of CDs or DVDs in there. And we went home and we put them into our old MacBooks or computers that we had sitting at home or even at work, and we'd upgrade. And then you'd finish the upgrade and you think, okay, what do I do with all this stuff now? So much waste, expanded logistically around the world, fundamental problem. But they've all got to realize that shifting to a software as a service operating model or a hardware as a service operating model, driving usage and value based on usage and value across their service streams has become their ability to create new value in market. And for some of them, that's been 6 to 10 times more value created as a company as a whole because of the predictability of their revenue streams and elimination of a lot of the elements to creating the old products in their old business models. So these are proven times when it comes to as a service offerings. Having said that, it's not just the tech companies. Oh, let's talk about this slide before we get to that. They have evolved even to take the next step and be proactive in terms of their commitments. You got HP, Microsoft, and Cisco presenting here what they're doing about sustainability, and they're ultimately trying to eliminate challenges across the whole sector when it comes to circular economy version 1 thinking, in our view. And the big question came up in the last couple of sessions that I participated in was, greenwashing, and this is the big question with all of this right now. Pretty pages, pretty websites, some great reports that sort of relate the same. The reality is, from my point of view, where is the original source of truth that I'd like to see and be able to analyze to present to us how sustainable, environmentally friendly these organizations actually are. So we've got two sides of the equation. Scaleups being these young SaaS startup companies who've now kicked it out of the park and now become scale-ups that have actually been able to demonstrate how new business model and technology convergence can actually create new operating models and differentiation in market. And we've got the others that are the transformers, the existing organizations that are recognizing they need to shift. And so here are just 3 simple examples of organizations that are doing that right now as scale-ups. SpaceX, I spoke about before. This is for me, is a magical moment in time for the space sector and humanity as a whole. In what they're doing is they're all about, we look at them sort of creating modern rocket ships and new ways of going to space. My view on this is they are creating reusable materials and systems that can actually eliminate cost and materials waste out of the equation as much as we can. And that's the start of that journey right now. Arrival is an amazing organization based out of the UK. And as for the last 5 years, they've been in stealth mode, and they've become a leading provider of EV trucks and buses in the UK, and now entering the US market. They've just gone public, and there's plenty of information for you to see about them. But they have rethought the whole economy that they have around them, and rethought the business model around that as well, where they're actually moving away from the operating model of large multi-billion-dollar mega factories that need to be produced like Tesla has right now. And Tesla, from my point of view, all they've done is fundamentally replaced an engine with a battery pack now, fundamentally, because when you look at their operating model, it's still like in a linear approach. They haven't solved for recyclability or remakeability yet. Arrival has taken a very different approach. And then Fairphone is the leading most sustainable phone in the world, because they enable consumers and business operators to actually recycle and put in place new modules of batteries, or better versions of batteries, better versions of cameras, and everything else that goes into that device, so that you can extend product use as part of the equation. And their fundamental values are driven around eliminating modern slavery out of the supply chain. Okay, so then we go to the transformers, and the transformers are these large organizations that have actually reshifted themselves. Interface is the leading most recyclable carpentry company in the world, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard about them. They are, I know of a story of one of our participating partners in what we're doing, where they have taken wattle tree brushes, and have taken the plant and incorporated into a building up in Queensland. Actually, I think it might be the Treasury Building or one other, where they've incorporated incorporating the focus around design and place with the materials they're using in their carpets. And it's just amazing in terms of how that's happening. But ultimately, you don't throw away, you give back your existing version of the carpentry, where they recycle and remanufacture it again. And you get another version of that ultimately at a time when you're going into a new office space, or your tenancies run out, or whatever else you might be thinking about, desizing, right sizing, and so forth. Signify is the old Philips lighting commercial business that got rebranded when they spun out. And as part of that spinning out process, they also reinvented their business model. They used to sell commercial lighting systems to large locations and spaces. This is one of the airports in Germany right now. And what they have shifted towards is a light as a service operating model. So when you engage with Signify, they shape and design what the system is going to look like, and you will only ever pay for the light that you actually use, not any of that infrastructure. They're responsible for the design, manufacture, and making the process more assembled and disassembled, and be able to recycle and remanufacture what they have as part of the operating model, fundamentally working towards our circulist approach. And then Rolls-Royce is one of the large organizations that we're aware of, who produces an amazing set of jet engines, and their operating model is you only pay for the energy efficiencies reductions that occur in using the engines. And it's an amazing model that's been around for at least 10 years. But these are as we're seeing, there are early pioneering organizations that are starting to shift towards this model and reimagining how things can be done. So what does the new circulist era come around to be? We're focusing on this space we call usage value networks, where the value is in the usage of products and devices across the network, and they all connected across the board. Rolls-Royce is doing that, Signify is doing that, Arrival is doing it. Many organizations. We don't have enough in Australia, and we need to get started. So with that in mind as well, I wanted to make a point of view around the term circular economy. Let me say that my perspective, I've been waiting at least 5 or 6 years, just sitting behind the sidelines, understanding and doing a lot of listening and doing a lot of sort of observing. And what I've come to realize is that when organizations and people talk about circular economy, they look at it predominantly from a version 1 lens, right? We know that there are these closed loop systems, but ultimately when it comes to circular economy, we try and tackle the easy stuff. And as hard as the easy stuff are, our focus sort of seems to at least move away from not trying to tackle the whole thing, because it all becomes too hard. And so when we see circular economy version 1, what we see is organizations and governments and academia speaking heavily around waste, recycling, right to repair, extended product life. And for us, that's great. But it's fundamentally dealing with the symptoms of the linear economy and not going the next step. And that's the era that we're in right now. That's the era we're in right now in Australia as well, and in other parts of the world. And we need to, if we only continue down this mindset and apply circular economy, the term, to what I've just shared in terms of version 1, all we're doing is kicking the can down the road and not solving towards the fundamental issues that we need to solve for when it comes to material usage and value and product design and execution. So with that in mind, we basically believe there's a second version of the circular economy that is a lot harder to execute. There's a lot harder to actually build out, but we have to get started. If we don't get started, who knows where humanity will be. I mean, I look at what I'm doing right now, and it's fundamentally driven by value will be created post my lifetime. I recognize that. I'm committing the rest of my life. I'm calling this my third age. And it's fundamentally driven around reshaping our focus on version 2 and getting it started, which is products as a service, designed for use as a service offerings, recycle, remade, and reuse, all in locations, in hundreds of locations around the world. So centralized mindsets pushing out to decentralized value being created. We all know that, there are many consumers and businesses that are already putting their hand up to try and actually get this kick-started. And they're known as conscious consumers. And I think there are also conscious businesses, like many of them that are B Corp enabled right now, or accredited and so forth. There is a natural movement going on. We need to recognize there is going to take a long time and not get frustrated by the way, but we also need to get started. But they're all out there. They're looking for value every day. They want to be doing good, both as companies and as individuals and families, to actually do good for the planet every day, not just, when they basically take an e-waste product down to the council and it's done. If we think about the beautiful thing our current operating model has done in a very sarcastic way, every morning here, every Monday morning here at our place, we get, for some reason, there's a truck that comes by and gets our red and blue bin. And that's our stuff that we're throwing out of the house, our invested sort of our waste that actually gets thrown into a truck and it goes somewhere. And the big question is, where does it go? What happens? We know that goes into landfill, fair enough. But at the end of the day, that behavior has been ingrained in us for a very long time. And we need to find ways to tackle those behaviors and reinvent them and reimagine them. So there are consumers and businesses out there that are actually hungry for that. So the people that we're focusing on, our what we're calling our growing globalist circulist tribe, are fundamentally these people across our ecosystem. Product manufacturers that are shifting towards a circular model and want to do good for people and the planet. Visionary entrepreneurs who foresee a circular-driven world and are wanting to be playing a part in reimagining manufacturing and the built world. We've got some amazing designers, engineers, and scientists, not just in Australia, but the rest of the world, that actually want to be doing that more than actually working in, old school organizations and actually acting and doing and being proud of it. And we have government leaders who actually want us to be driving economic, social, and environmental benefits, which we're building. I'm really proud of what we're doing here in New South Wales, but I think there is so much more that can be done. So let's get straight into the next sort of area, which is around reimagining design, production, and service. And taking you all back 2.5 years ago, I sat down, I sort of ideate and visualize based on drawing. I think it's my interest in when I was a teenager in becoming an industrial designer or an architect, but I've applied my visual thinking now to reimagining businesses and ventures. And what this sort of brought to life for me, when I'll just share it at a high level, is, we've got homes, offices, and lifestyles at the top. We've got circulist people and products and robots, automation and workspaces that are based local for local. And in our experience and our view is that they should be beautiful. None of let's move away from these ugly warehouses that seem to be existing. Why can we not operate? Why in a circularist context can't we not operate in beautiful local manufacturing, service, and assembly locations all in one? And then we've got products and appliances that are complex in design, but actually create e-waste in our world, and circular sustainable materials that actually close out the approach. So this is fundamentally an early stage thinking around circularity and the circulist mindset a few years ago, from my point of view. Just sharing your personal little story, a moment in time. what this leads to is this sort of a distributed circular microfactory experience where we have, work, community, education, service, regeneration, man and machine, or people and machine, working together as smart jobs, not just for the future that they exist now. It just needs about amplifying them. And so then we have an organization called Arrival, which I mentioned before, that is actually on that journey right now. And I'll leave you all to sort of find out more about them on their website. And there's a lot of public information about them. But they're radically moving away from having global center mega factories and supply chains, which is the root cause of all issues around our productivity. 80%, we believe that the design and engineering phase is part of the problem. So we're trying to focus on helping designers, industrial designers and engineers to start reframing their mindset around. And we have to take the step. If the solutions don't exist, we have to take the journey and kick that off.
I will start.
So very small example of what they actually do. Just cool. Sorry, hang on. Trying to do video on video is sometimes hard.
I will start from a quote.
You can tell this guy's quite creative in even with what he wears.
Intelligent tool can make things bigger and more complex, but it takes a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. We take this concept very seriously here at Arrival.
Build 10,000 vans a year when we're operating on 2 shifts. And at that size, we believe a metro area can support almost all of that demand.
It's a 6-minute long video. You can find it on the web, and it's just amazing in terms of pathway they're taking. But we want to see proactive organizations that are impact mission driven, circular design driven, that are going to do what Arrival does millions, like hundreds of thousands over, right? So Australia has a great part to play in that because of our very long tail set of small manufacturers that are sort of thought about in the wrong way. And I think there's an opportunity to reimagine that as well. So we can actually be positive, forward looking leaders of tomorrow, even in a manufacturing context. So the next few slides, I'm going to sort of start wrapping up soon. And so we can actually have a conversation and any QA, is that we're looking at building a readiness framework. And we're looking for collaboration partners to work with us because we're looking at driving this as an open framework. So if anyone wants to join, please come along and reach out. The Circulist Readyrest Framework is designed to map and measure operational capabilities in the existing manufacturing-led companies and also provide a circulist blueprint for assigning entrepreneurs who recognize a circular distributed network of microfactories could become their cooperating model. I know that's a bit of a tongue twister, but that's basically the focus at the moment. And these are 4 key areas around stakeholder experience, and that's the language that's been used here is quite important, impact mindset, intelligent operating system, and flexible local infrastructure. Bringing these 4 approaches together is what we're calling the CRF. And this is sort of our beta version thinking right now. There are 4 dimensions, 16 domains, and 48 capabilities that sit under this sort of framework. And so if we just look at one of the 4, which is intelligent operating system, and there are 4 within here. There are 16 domains that cut across them. And then there are over 48 capabilities that all need to be tracked and measured and come back to in terms of a snapshot in time, and then working towards improving. This is the depth of the framework. I haven't gone into the how, when, and why. So, well, how, what, and do we do here. But here is just a glimpse of what we're focusing on in terms of areas and topics. And this is a sort of a general assessment that we want to be able to take to organizations, not to talk about, smart manufacturing and innovative manufacturing and slapping adjectives in front of manufacturing, but seriously reshaping the whole operating system and not being afraid to make change. We are just about to launch a white paper, which is going to be called the Circulist Imperative. We're actually about to launch our website as well. We've got a lot of things converging in the next 2 weeks to be come to life publicly. And the Circulist Imperative is our white paper that basically demonstrates the 5 different sort of stages to becoming circulist driven in this sort of intelligent local network. And we're looking for collaborative partners to come and join us on that mission as well. The reality is, as this slide says, it's going to take decades, not years. And we need people that are going to come along for the long-term journey. In getting started for us, into getting sort of Circulist level 5, we need to recognize the first core things, or the 3 key mantras that you're coming into, which is your customers These are so simple, but yet so powerful. Your customers should not need to own the product. Really simple, right? The second mantra or reason is your customers should not be solely responsible for product repair and manufacture and maintenance, right? Again, the last one, creating products that are destined to become waste is just simply wrong. We know these things. We seem to sort of create them in these, labels that seem to sort of don't mean anything to anybody. And these three fundamentals is what we want organizations to come along and join us on the journey with as we enter 2022. So with that note, I'm going to sort of close it and ask for anybody that wants to, come and join us on the journey. About a month ago, we launched our Circulist Quest podcast, which I think there'll be about 8 or 10 already on and you'll find them on Spotify or most major podcasting streams, where we sort of have conversations with people in market and organizations and practitioners that are executing on this journey without even knowing it. So you can listen to and start to kick off your process around finding out more. And you can email me at nick@circulist.org. So with that, I think maybe we go to Q&A if we have enough time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nick. No, we definitely have enough time. I think we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. So Akasha Rose just said, how do we reach out to you to be part of the blueprint? So was that just your email address that you put up before?
That's right. Yep. Yeah, nick@circulist.org.
Fantastic. I'll just type that into the chat. Okay, so going back through the chat, Nick in the room had a question. So I was wondering how you were dealing with the rise of cryptocurrencies in this context of circling electronic waste back into the human system.
That is part of the how question that I haven't answered. So that's a great question. We are looking at building a platform that fundamentally, I won't go into too much detail, but the platform, the way that we're going to start in probably about end of 2022, we'll be kicking off the Circulist OS platform. And the Circulist OS platform will be fundamentally focused around reimagining the materials economy. And in order to do that, we have to track, measure, and verify usage across real products being used. When I say real products, I'm talking about products that are, and we're talking about products in context of Circulist, it's electronic products and devices and appliances across 5 major areas: home, health, built world, mobility, and scientific sort of appliances and devices and instrumentation tools. And the commonality around all those is that, as we've just spoken about before, these devices are relatively well designed, in inverted commas, in the industrial paradigm. And because as they get used and come to a, let's call it an end of life in the traditional linear way, they are so well designed, they're so difficult to disassemble, therefore creating the e-waste, right? So our approach to this is to actually build a distributed ledger technology platform that is at the heart of this. And we're looking at building out a purpose-driven tokenized economy that will enable us to all work collectively towards achieving the Circulist mission. And that's all I can say for now. So.
Great, thank you. Now, Nick, was there anyone in the Beehive room who'd like to speak or has a question?
Hey, Nick here. There is not currently. That last one was from someone here who has since left. So hopefully they'll be able to watch the recording for that answer. But just looking around the room, there's no one. No.
Great. So Akasha. Oh, okay, so we've got one from Steve. I'll just come back to that in a sec. So Akasha Rose says, sort of more of a comment. So they're currently building, so Civic Ledger is currently building a verifiable and trustable source of truth for ESG and CSR reporting. So they've given a bit of resource there. What have we got here? Okay, so Stephen Liaros. Love what you're doing, Nick, particularly the shift to everything as a service. We can see how this can be implemented in manufacturing sectors, and there is an emerging notion of mobilities as a service. Can you tell us whether you think this can apply to housing as a service?
Oh, very much so, very much so. So, you know, there's so many things to talk about that with regards to, it all comes down to behavior change, right? Positive behavior change. And that's learnings from startup sector and trying to drive that. The reality is doing it with a software perspective where we have these startups. I mean, startups are not even businesses yet, right? They're hypotheses that are trying to prove a positive behavioral change, right? And if they don't actually achieve positive behavioral change, they die. It's really simple. And there's many of those. For every 10 startups that launch, at least eight of them are going to, or probably about 6 in the early days, disappear because they haven't achieved that positive behavior change. So with that in mind, hardware is hard. It's a lot harder than software, right? So, from a hardware perspective, we need to start looking at the demands that are being asked for in market or to be presented to them in order to sort of drive mobility through this circularist mindset. There are a couple of examples of organizations that are already doing this in mobility from an EV perspective as well. Lynk & Co, L-Y-N-K and Co, is a spin-off out of Volvo, who actually focused exclusively around materials and reimagining mobility as a service. In order to do that, they've designed and approached the platform in terms of the devices that are taken to market under as a service offering, as a subscription offering. And they are kicking off their activities in the UK right now, in Europe across the board, and they will expand internationally over time. One aspect around that is if we are looking at closed loop thinking and valuing materials at their core, how is it okay that organizations like Tesla and BYD can produce them in mega factories and ship them over here, and putting the onus and pressure on consumers and business owners for whatever happens to those products over time, right? As big as they are or as small as they are. So there are opportunities to think about how these products actually being consumed or used in a particular ecosystem, in a particular city, in a particular sector of our industry, and rethink them. I mean, Arrival has done an amazing job in terms of helping reshape organizations, and they haven't taken an approach of, it's going to be more expensive. They have driven their operating model to actually bring the price point at a parity that actually delivers a 10 times better experience, but at the same price point that we currently apply for sort of mobility at the moment. So we could talk about a whole hour about that topic. So thanks for that question.
Great, thank you. And Phil, you took yourself off mute before. Did you want to make a comment or ask a question?
Well, I put one in the chat there. I guess it seems to be more of a comment rather than anything else. But unless I've misunderstood, your presentation, I see the model presented has actually been, in operating already. But I see it as that there's, as a result of it, there's a breakdown in the trust between consumers and companies. It seems to me that it more or less involves renting either software or hardware. And the trouble is you don't know what a fair price is. So, when you buy software, well, you don't buy software, you rent software, and who knows what a fair price is. And my experience with HP laptops is that they are designed to get slower and slower and slower to the point where you need to buy a new laptop. Mm-hmm. So, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but, if I've got to pay for a product, it just seems to me that you're talking about, it just seems to me that you're liable to exploitation.
I think the opposite is true. Is that we currently when we look at the measures of value right now, and we all know this, fundamentally it's financial, right? If we took a perspective on a CFO's perspective and say, okay, what we sold 1 million devices today or this month, there's 1 million proprietors that we've actually sold them to people, and all they've done is basically taken a ledger transaction from their P&L and increase some cash into and margin onto their balance sheet. And as we know, we're not tracking or measuring in any way, shape, or form the environmental and social impact in any of our approaches to accounting, right? We have to help organizations shift the lens towards incorporating environmental and social impact into the equation, but they're actually not even built into the fundamental financial model that we run, right? And that's been happening for centuries. So I know I'm quite talking about it in a very macro level, but there needs to be a change where we actually, what the software as a service sector has done, shifting from software, is helped us basically drive recurring revenue streams as a revenue engine. And also because of that, because it's subscription and not rent, which is fundamentally different, we're not about leasing existing products and then giving them back, because we're not solving the core problem around materials, right? The more and more, every year what's going on right now, we're having more and more products being produced and more products being wasted or not being very hard to disassemble them. We have no ability to fix them ourselves, focusing on the right to repair approach. And because of that, we just seem to throw them away, or we have a hard time even finding ways to throw away. I've actually got 6 to 8 laptops sitting in my garage, not knowing how to get rid of them at the moment. Old machines that have actually been used across the family over the last 3 or 4 years. So from that perspective, we need to start shifting away from it's a mindset shift, and then it's trying to work out the operating model to make it happen. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a massive change. But in the subscription sector, as I said, in the software sector, when organizations have shifted towards a software as a service model, where the model is based on pricing, is based on usage and the value that you get out of it, right? Then it really changes the way that you run this operating model. In software, you have design and engineering teams that are always tracking real-time data usage of their products. We've launched this feature, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of resonance with people. Maybe we should rethink and refocus what we should be focusing on. And that real-time data access to millions of devices across a collective network that are being used, the same way Rolls-Royce has with their jet engines, is the opportunity for everything as a service in the future. But we're focusing on e-waste right now, and that's going to take a long time. We're not going to get out of this for the next 10 to 20 years. So I hope I've answered your question, but I just think it's a fundamental change in mindset. We've been operating in this sort of mindset for the time we've all been born, right? So there's a new paradigm coming through. We need to focus on production and consumption habits around usage and value, and then closing out. How do we close out the loop when we can't even recycle or manufacture, or brands can't recycle and remanufacture in Australia? We seem to come up to this mindset that, it just comes out of this global mega factory, they ship them around the world, and then they put the onus back on us consumers and businesses to take responsibility for it. And then we should not be taking responsibility for it. Why should we, right? So in our view, circular economy version 2, which equates to being circulist in mindset, doesn't have waste, recycling, or right to repair into it. It's the opposite. We eliminate all those out of the equation. And we are taking baby steps at Circulist to grow this and to build the movement around it. And we're just sort of on this pathway right now. We're not going to solve it in a year. We're going to solve it in 50 years. So, and it's not for everybody. As I said at the beginning and during the presentation, there'll be some large, brands that can't shift their approach. They're going to have an innovator's dilemma model when the Circulists and the scale-ups that are focusing on circularity are going to hit them hard. And that's the reality of market forces. And consumers will be they're not dumb. They're expecting these types of organizations to come through. So many products are coming through as a service offerings, right? So that are dealing with the hard stuff as well, not just the software side.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification and the explanation there. We have one final question before we finish up. In the Beehive room, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, Nick here from the room. I suppose I very much like the idea of design to deconstruct and make those sort of modular things usable into other products into the future. I suppose I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, particularly on, say, using components out of electronic waste, particularly any sort of product really that is already in existence. Kind of that extra step before it being like, there's so many laptops out there already. What do we do with the individual cells? I say this from a selfish point because that's what I'm currently doing. It's like we rip out the old cells from laptops and reuse them in small scale solar systems.
Yep.
And so I just kind of think of extrapolate that out to other products that are already in existence before we just redesign and make everything new. To be able to do that, what can we use out of the stuff that's already out there just in circulation?
Yeah, 9% of our devices and appliances are sort of only being recycled in the world right now, right? So there's an opportunity for 91% to go, right? Which is massive. So I think you take a frame of mind, Nick, around design and engineering of products and devices actually is sort of 80% of the root cause. What does that mean? I've had conversations with industrial designers and mechatronics people around the world around this problem, and what they realize, and they do know it, but they realize it as its core. Every day they wake up and do what they do, they are creating waste. They're not creating beautifully designed products that look good for the consumer that's going to buy them. They recognize ultimately the older ones, that all I've been doing in my life is creating waste in the world. And when you take that perspective, it actually is quite, it's destroying. I would say it's just a big aha moment recognition for them that they are part of executing on that. And so going back to the 80%, leverage that occurs through circular design and engineering, industrial designers have a hard time trying to pick that. I mean, the conversations I've had with a lot of them has been, but this is all I'm presented with. I can't do what I can do anything else. Our clients come and said they want to roll out this product. They basically get a prototype in China that gets sent back, and they continue sort of working towards just getting it designed for production and then consumption. And the briefs that are being received needs to change. So it's also, it's a complex problem to solve, right? There's different stakeholders. You've got your product designers, you've got your product manufacturers, you've got your sales engines around the world. Not as much on service centers and so forth, as we know, which is the issue around just getting things fixed and better. And then the bigger challenge is in Australia, look at the amount of waste that we get, that we have no way of actually dealing with it, right? So it's, we've sort of had these products thrown at us or bought. You have bought these products, and then we are then expected to try and deal with the waste in some way, shape, or form. And it's going back to the the linear iPhone example, as advanced as a company they are. The reality is it's going to be very difficult for large organizations with existing brands that we know to sort of shift to this. They'll take a long-term horizon approach to this. I mean, even with Apple, Nick, you'll see that they are throwing little features to shift themselves towards a circularity mindset by giving us the ability to buy products, sort of give back their product. It's the first step. They are delivering products under pay by the month model. So they are very slowly, ever so slowly. It's the beauty of what they do is ever so slowly they've actually changing our behaviors, because they don't want to go hard stop and actually change things, right? And impact their revenue streams and bottom line, and they're a public company, right? But they are taking a very long-term horizon in dropping new features and sort of approaches to what they do and how they operate. Having said that they've got price issues in terms of dealing with replacing products and so forth. But materials, from our point of view, materials and what we're calling the materials economy, and the mindset of taking that perspective of materials at the core is the opportunity to reimagine how we need to be doing things. So when it comes to your example around sort of was it glass? Was it all?
So this one's lithium-ion batteries out of laptops.
Right. Okay, that's
sort of thought there. It's like I mean, these companies, in part of their import costs, they do have to set a amount of money aside to deal with the end of life sort of stuff.
Yep.
But I mean, that's like not very efficiently spent. So there is kind of money available in that space that could be kind of used better.
Yeah, no, that's true. There's a great company called Redwood Materials out of the US trying to deal with that right now, Nick. It's actually one of the ex-original Tesla founders has gone off to try and solve this problem right now, where he's raised about $1.8 billion actually, most recently to, they got into proof of concept and they validated it. Now they're closing well with GM at the moment, GM Automotive, to sort of help them scale. So there are companies around the world doing that. We actually raise a good point. We need to be open and in terms of our mindset and not be insular and just thinking about Australia and what we're doing here. And it's something that I'd like all of us to start thinking about. How can we become global leaders around this sort of circularity approach to an operating model that actually could make sense? So these are high level statements, but then it's getting into the weeds to try and actually get some of our small manufacturing operators in Australia, some of the young companies that are coming through around electrification and space and so forth, to start being open-minded about not accepting what's coming across from the Northern Hemisphere, and actually trying to be thoughtful around how we're designing our systems and approaches and go-to-market models and business models to be much more forward-leading and driving a new way of adopting things and using things and giving them back, right? So that's probably my my probably forward statement is that it's up to us Australians to actually get on the front foot versus continue to accept what's sent to us, right? And take what we can do and actually take it overseas and export that capability.
Yeah, it's a good point. We've asked Tesla for their batteries and they're like, no, we got this. We'll
Yeah, of course they have.
Oh, that's fantastic, Nick. Thank you so much for what you're doing and for sharing your work with us today. Really looking forward to checking out your podcast and exploring these ideas further, because I think you're on the money. Like, the circulist mindset is so important to addressing these issues of consumption and waste, and it's a massive, massive issue that we need to address. So yeah, thank you so much. Big Zoom round of applause.
Thank you.
And just going